Gemar Chatima Tova. You can say it a little louder than that. Gemar Tov. We have 3 kids, 2 different schools, 2 adults with 2 big jobs, all under one roof. Like many of you, we need constant reminders of who ordered hot lunch, when there is a game, who needs to be picked up, dropped off, and when finally, at the end of the day, everyone will be back at home, hopefully for dinner. To make the whole thing a little bit more organized, my wife bought a dry erase calendar, and she hung it up in the kitchen and asked for my help to update it. So I took a marker. I filled in all the days where I had meetings and after-hour obligations. I looked at all I had written with the marker, and I felt instantly more settled. So I kept writing. Finally, after an entire month of commitments, hot lunch orders, and carpools, I felt great. And I put down the marker when out of the corner of my eye, I saw one very important word on the marker's label: permanent. I wrote everything in permanent marker, and I ruined the dry erase board. Like our dry erase board, we often feel that our lives are written in permanent marker. That's actually the view of most ancient civilizations. According to the ancients, humanity is inseparable from the natural world. Therefore, as nature moves cyclically, biological extension, so does human life. With that in mind, the ancients believed everything that was will be again. With our lives as part of nature's cycle, there is no moving forward. Life is lived on repeat again and again. In the Bible, our ancestors challenged this ancient construct and offered a radically different idea. According to Thomas Cahill in his book, The Gift of the Jews introduced the idea of linear time to the world. Judaism, we proclaim to the world what was, but what will be, that's up to each and every one of us. We do not have to live in circles. We can move forward in life. We can move forward by growing, by changing, and improving. It sounds simple enough, but out there in life, it's really hard. Over and over again, we live on repeat. We repeat our daily schedules, the meals that we eat, the jokes we share, the ways we connect intimately, and even how we fight with one another. According to noted author Tom Driver in his book, The Magic of Ritual, repetition provides the scaffolding of our lives. Repetition or ritualization helps ground us in a world that threatens to uproot us at any moment. The highly ritualized manner in which we shower and get dressed every morning, enjoy the same recipe for matzah balls on Passover, and sit in the same seats year after year in shul on the high holidays, the blessings of this consistency, they provide a sense of calm and order in an often tumultuous world. But when we're off the path, when our lives are veering off course and in need of straightening out, stepping out of our circular, repetitive patterns proves extremely difficult. For those of us who struggle with a few extra pounds, we diet only to find ourselves back to the same old eating habits a few months later. married couples, we have a way of having the same fight over and over and over again. And the silly little things at work that annoyed us last year, most likely they're going to get us angry again in the coming year. Why is it so tough? Why is it so difficult to change and step out of the cycle of sameness? Another way of asking this question is, when life compels us to march forward, to embrace the gift of the Jews, why do we insist, like the ancients, on living in repetitive circles? This very question prompted the development of schema therapy in psychology. According to schema therapy, early on in each of our lives, we all develop a way, a pattern, or a schema to respond when we are emotionally wounded. This schema, this pattern, is a coping mechanism that helps each one of us deal with pain. According to schema therapy, most of us respond to pain in one of three ways. The first response is surrender. So, for example, a criticized child whose schema is surrender becomes an adult who just takes all criticism in, believing it's fair and deserved. The second coping mechanism is escape. Here, the criticized child, relying on escape, lives life avoiding vulnerability and makes sure to stay clear of any confrontation. The third coping mechanism is compensation, where the attacked person takes the wounding experience in the opposite direction. So a criticized child, for example, who copes through compensation, becomes a person who responds to criticism with overconfidence and arrogance. Surrender, escape, or compensation. Most of us are conditioned to respond to emotional pain in one of these three ways. Let's pause for a moment and each of us think if that makes sense in our own lives. According to schema therapy, when we are confronted with emotional pain, we consistently rely on one of these three coping mechanisms to get us through. Whichever schema takes root in our lives, the coping mechanism eventually becomes harmful and ultimately prevents us from maturely handling adversity. Schema therapy was introduced as a way of helping people break the patterns, of finding ways to deal with our pain without relying on harmful coping mechanisms. Reading the Bible, I gotta tell you, makes me think that God had a really good schema therapist. Remember Noah and the ark? With visions of great, big, and fuzzy animals all aboard a boat, topped off with a shining rainbow, and a generation of our kids raised on visits to the exhibit at the Skirball. It's easy to think of this story in the most pediatric of ways. But the story actually introduces a revolutionary approach to dealing with difficulty, consistent with schema therapy. In the biblical story, 10 generations after the creation of the world, infuriated with humanity and all of its sinning, God decides to flood the world and start over. I imagine that God felt wounded and rejected by the bad behavior. So rather than confront humanity's shortcomings directly, God relies on God's coping mechanism, escape. By bringing the flood, God escapes dealing with the bad behavior and all the work necessary to help humanity grow. Instead of dealing with the problem, God brings a flood, hoping to wash the problem away and start the world again. Think of it as creation take two. But after the flood, the waters began to recede and revealed a lifeless world filled with death and destruction. The horrific sight of a world laid to waste shakes God to the root of God's soul. God's morality is awakened, and God recognizes a dangerous pattern or schema developing. Then, in one of the Bible's most powerful moments, God breaks free from the pattern and vows that human sin, no matter the magnitude, can never again elicit divine genocidal destruction. It's a stunning breakthrough. And to assure the world that the lesson has been learned, God offers the world a sign, a rainbow. Even when humanity returns to sin, the rainbow reminds God not to fall back on a destructive coping mechanism. By breaking the pattern, by vowing to work with humanity, the rainbow stretched across the sky serves as a powerful symbol of the possibility for each of us to overcome our conditioned responses and coping mechanisms in order to seek more productive ways of confronting difficulty and pain in our own lives. By the way, after the flood and the rainbow, it's not like it was happily ever after in the Torah. Far from it. When the Israelites journeyed from Egypt to the promised land, several times God gets fed up with the sinful Israelites and appears ready to wipe them all out and to start anew. But despite a return to similar circumstances, God does not repeat God's mistake. The rainbow forever directs God away from a cycle of destruction. For us, the rainbow inspires a belief that change is possible. Like God, we need not resign ourselves to relying on the same coping mechanisms in the face of life's difficulties. Life has a way of returning us to similar situations over and over again. But the rainbow reminds us that while we return, we do not need to repeat the mistakes of the past. That's why we have the high holidays. It's like an annually scheduled intensive schema therapy session. The goal of the holidays, of course, is tshuva, which literally means return. On the high holidays, we can piously pray, beat our chests, and even offer heartfelt remorse. But beating a chest, crying out to God, and offering apologies from the bottom of our hearts are empty gestures without changing our ways. According to Maimonides, true repentance, tshuva, return, occurs when a difficult situation presents itself again in our lives, and this time, with a lesson learned, we do it differently. Maimonides encourages us to learn from our past mistakes, and like God with the flood, to reject the coping mechanisms of our youth. The future of our lives are not already written in permanent marker. The way we respond to difficulty is not programmed into the DNA of our souls. We can change and grow. We can remember the rainbow. Several years ago, a group from Strayer University placed an enormous chalkboard in the middle of Manhattan. Written on the chalkboard was an odd request: share your biggest regret. And throughout the day, New Yorkers paused in their daily routines. They stopped and considered the question and shared their life's greatest regret on a chalkboard in the midst of the bustling city. At one point in the afternoon, with several participants looking on, the chalkboard was erased, and upon the freshly cleaned surface, in brightly colored chalk, the organizers wrote, "Blank slate." The onlookers, many of whom had only a minute earlier shared their regret, said that when they saw this new message, the promise of a blank slate reassured them. After all, their regret was written in chalk, not permanent marker. Erasing the regrets reminded folks that their last chapter was not yet written. The fresh, blank chalkboard reminded people of the power of possibility. Yesterday's regrets only become permanent if we allow them. Like God with the flood, we can break through the harmful schemas that repeat over and over again in our lives by responding differently. Today, on Yom Kippur, we all stand before a chalkboard filled with mistakes and destructive patterns. And today is our chance to pick up the eraser and wipe it clean. Not so that we can pretend it never happened, but rather so we remember the rainbow by returning without repeating. We are Jews, not ancients. We do not believe we are resigned to lives spinning in circles. Certainly, each of us will return to difficult situations that have tripped us up before, but we do not need to repeat our response. We can remember the rainbow, reaching above and beyond to overcome obstacles in our path. This year, let's open our eyes to our lives' vast expanse and set our gaze upon the rainbow, calling for us to pick up chalk and color our lives anew. Shana Tova.